was something about the way Margaret adjusted her worn cardigan that morning. Something deliberate. The fabric was thin at the elbows, soft from years of washing. She looked at herself in the mirror of her small apartment and smiled quietly. At 58, she had learned that people reveal themselves in unexpected moments. Her daughter Sarah had set up this blind date against her wishes. A successful man, she said. Someone respectable. Margaret had resisted at first. After 20 years of widowhood, she had built a peaceful life. She volunteered at the community center. She tended her small garden. She was content, but Sarah insisted. Just one coffee. Just 1 hour. So Margaret made a choice that morning. She would go to this date dressed simply. Very simply. No jewelry except her late husband's wedding band on a chain around her neck. No makeup, her oldest comfortable clothes, shoes that had walked 1,000 miles. She wanted to see something true. The coffee shop hummed with the gentle noise of a Saturday morning. David sat by the window, his tailored suit crisp, his silver hair perfectly combed. At 62, he had built an empire from nothing. 3 manufacturing plants, 200 employees, respect in every room he entered. He checked his watch. She was late. When Margaret walked through the door, David noticed her immediately. Not because she stood out, but because she seemed to fade into the background. She wore clothes that spoke of hard times. Her hands looked weathered. Her shoes scuffed. She approached his table slowly. "Are you David?" He stood reflexively. "Years of taught manners, yes, Margaret." She nodded and sat down. David felt something stir in his chest. Not disappointment. Something else. Curiosity, perhaps. They ordered coffee. The silence between them felt heavy at first. "Your daughter told me you work at the community center," David said, his voice gentle. "I volunteer there." Margaret wrapped her hands around her cup. "I help serve meals. Sometimes I organize the clothes donations." David watched her hands. They trembled slightly. From cold or nervousness, he could not tell. "That must be rewarding work." "It is." She looked up at him then. Really looked. Her eyes were clear, honest. "Every person who comes through those doors has a story. Most people do not want to hear those stories. But I do." Something in David's throat tightened. He thought of his own mother. How she had worked 3 jobs to raise him alone after his father left. How she had worn the same coat for 10 winters. How her hands had looked just like Margaret's hands looked now. "Tell me about your work," Margaret said. David paused. Usually he spoke easily about his success, his achievements, the climb from poverty to prosperity. But sitting across from this woman in her threadbare cardigan, those stories felt hollow. "I make parts for machines," he said finally. "It sounds boring when I say it like that. Does it fulfill you?" No one had ever asked him that question. "Not in 40 years of business, some days," he answered honestly. "Some days I wonder if I built the wrong life." Margaret's expression softened. "That is a brave thing to admit." They talked for an hour, then 2. The coffee shop filled and emptied around them. David found himself telling her about his mother, about the apartment with peeling wallpaper where he grew up, about eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week, about the shame he felt wearing the same pants to school until they were too short. Margaret listened with her whole body, leaning in, nodding, her eyes never leaving his face. "Your mother sounds like she was strong," Margaret said. "She was." David's voice caught. "She died 10 years ago. I never told her I understood. I never thanked her properly, she knew." Margaret reached across the table. Her weathered hand covered his. Mothers always know. David looked down at their hands. Hers so worn, his so carefully manicured. Yet in that moment he felt seen in a way he had not felt seen in decades. "Can I tell you something?" Margaret said quietly. "Anything. I am not poor." She smiled almost apologetically. "I have a comfortable retirement. A nice home. Savings. I dressed this way today on purpose." David froze. "I wanted to see," she continued, "if you would treat me differently. If you would look past appearances. Most men my daughter has tried to set me up with, they see age or they see loneliness and they think that makes me desperate. They think that makes me grateful for any attention." She pulled her hand back slowly. "But you, David, you looked at me like I was a whole person. You shared your real self, not the successful version, the human version." David felt his chest expand. Something that had been locked tight for years suddenly opened. I see you too, Margaret. He cleared his throat. And what I see is someone extraordinary. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, the kind that come from being understood. They sat together in the warm light of the coffee shop. Two people who had lived full lives, who had known loss and struggle, who carried wisdom in the lines of their faces. David drove Margaret home that afternoon. She lived in a beautiful old house with a garden full of roses. When she invited him in for tea, he accepted. Her home was filled with photographs, a late husband who smiled from every frame, children and grandchildren, a life fully lived. You must have loved him very much, David said, looking at a wedding photo. I did. Margaret stood beside him. For 38 years, but love does not end when life does. It changes. It makes room for new chapters. She turned to look at David. I would like to know you better, if you would like that too. David thought about the morning, about his assumptions, about how close he had come to missing this. I would like that very much. They began seeing each other regularly after that. Quiet dinners, long walks, conversations that stretched into evening. David learned that Margaret had been a teacher before retirement, that she wrote poetry, that she believed in second chances. Margaret learned that David supported 3 scholarships for underprivileged children, that he visited his employees' families when they were sick, that beneath the successful exterior lived a man who still remembered what it meant to struggle. 6 months later, David asked Margaret to marry him. Not in a fancy restaurant, in her garden among the roses where real things grew. She said yes. At their small wedding, Sarah whispered to her mother, I am glad you wore that old cardigan to your first date. Margaret smiled. Sometimes we have to test people, not to trick them, but to see if they can see past surfaces. Your father taught me that. He saw me when I was young and uncertain. David sees me now. That is how I know it is real. Love in later life is different. It carries the weight of experience, the knowledge of loss, the appreciation for time. David and Margaret understood this. They did not waste days on pretense. They built something honest. And it all began because one woman had the courage to show up as herself. And one man had the wisdom to recognize something precious when he saw it.